President Trump is called upon to remove these traitors from office. And this includes, by the way, judicial members, in other words, judges, members of the court, who are themselves engaged in acts of rebellion against the United States of America. Welcome to this special video report. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution grants the president the power to remove from office any official, civilian or military, who is engaged in supporting or aiding a rebellion against the United States government. This is Mike Adams here, the publisher of naturalnews.com, the founder of Brighteon.com, that's the YouTube alternative platform for free speech, with a special report here about the 14th Amendment. This is, it turns out, the secret weapon that my sources have been telling me about for many months. They didn't tell me it was the 14th Amendment until confirming it recently. This is a secret weapon that Trump is going to invoke in order to crush the illegal insurrection against the United States of America and defend America from its domestic enemies and terrorists who are right now waging an actual kinetic war against the United States and its people. Now, in order to understand this, it's crucial to really know about the 14th Amendment. What is it? What does it actually say? Well, you can read it. It's online. You can just search for it. It's at congress.gov, by the way. It's not very long. And we're going to talk about sections 2 and 3 in particular, a little bit about section 4 as well. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868 in the aftermath of the Civil War, which involved a lot of issues, obviously, around slavery and slaves not being counted as citizens. And so the 14th Amendment was created in order to grant slaves citizenship, well, I should say due process, because the 13th Amendment was more about granting them their citizenship, but the 14th Amendment is about due process under the law, or equal protection under the law. And under the 14th Amendment, it says that every naturalized person or citizen born in the United States shall enjoy this equal protection under the law. And that's what the 14th Amendment is mostly known for. In other words, you can't discriminate against somebody because they used to be a slave. Even though no one living today used to be a slave in America back in 1868, many people were freed slaves at the time, and they needed to be granted equal protection under the law and due process as well. But there was something else in the 14th Amendment that's really crucial for our time today. Essentially, the northern states, which won the Civil War, wanted to make sure that there were no rebellious leaders in southern state governments that could undermine the new union between the North and the South. After all, the southern states wanted to secede from the Union at the time and form their own nation. And so language was inserted into the 14th Amendment that said that no person who takes an oath of office, whether that person is a civilian or military, can hold office anywhere in the country if they were engaged in a rebellion against the United States or in aiding or comforting those engaged in rebellion against the United States. Now, the tables have turned. Now it is, in fact, the Democrat left-leaning states that are engaged in this open rebellion against the United States of America. We have members of Congress like AOC and Rashid Tlaib and others who are saying they essentially want to burn down our system and replace it. They want to overthrow our government. We have the city of Portland reportedly funding an actual war encampment in the city of Portland that houses paid agitators who emerge from their tents each night to attack federal buildings and federal law enforcement officers as part of this rising, escalating insurrection against the United States of America. We have this rebellion happening in New York, in Illinois, in Oregon, Washington State, of course, with Seattle and the Chaz Chop Zone, as well as California with Governor Newsom. And all across the country, we have officials, for example, district attorneys, many of whom are George Soros-funded traitors who are releasing leftists who are arrested, making sure they're never charged with crimes, even though those leftists are carrying out acts of arson, looting, insurrection, attacking law enforcement officers, assault, property destruction, and many other things, violent acts of extreme violent riots and property destruction. These are acts of insurrection against the United States of America. And it's clear now that these officials who are in these states are complicit in these acts, such as Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler, for example, or Governor Inslee of Washington, who allowed Seattle to be overtaken by a radical criminal insurrectionist group. And in doing this, by the way, Governor Inslee violated the 14th Amendment because he violated the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment that ensures that every American citizen shall be granted equal protection under the law. But Governor Inslee, by refusing to stop the insurrection, using the National Guard under his control in the state of Washington, he then took away from the citizens of Seattle, especially those inside that particular zone, he took away from them their constitutional protections under the law. Their equal protection was stripped away. So all of these officials, whether it's Governor Newsom in California or Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago or Mayor de Blasio in New York City or Governor Cuomo of New York, all of these officials who are granting aid or comfort to an open rebellion against the United States, they may now be, in fact, they must now be, under the Constitution, they must be removed from office. And Trump has the power to do that. In fact, he has the duty to do so. He is called upon by the Constitution under the 14th Amendment, which was ratified by the states of these United States in 1868. President Trump is called upon to remove these traitors from office. And this includes, by the way, judicial members, in other words, judges, members of the court, who are themselves engaged in acts of rebellion against the United States of America, which would include, by the way, quite a few judges in Hawaii who continue to try to block America's national defenses with border control, for example. These judges must be removed from office. They are no longer qualified to hold office under the 14th Amendment because they themselves are engaged in rebellion against the United States government. And remember, it was the North that put this into place in 1868, primarily the North, northern states, Union states, because they did not want some civil war to happen again. They did not want insurrectionist members of government, whether at the local level, mayors or governors or judges or police chiefs, members of the military, anybody. They didn't want them to have power if they were going to use that power to try to undermine the United States of America. And so that's why this was written into the 14th Amendment, although most people have forgotten this, and I have to admit, I didn't remember this either until this was brought to my attention a little while ago. I did additional research and checked with my sources to find out that, wow, this is all true. It's actually written right into the law. Now, in the 14th Amendment, we can talk about the three sections. But I want to jump to Section 2 next. Although what I've been talking about so far, the removal from office of complicit judges and mayors and governors and so on, that's all in Section 3 of the amendment. Section 2 calls for eliminating House of Representatives. In other words, members of Congress should be eliminated from states that are engaged in open rebellion against the United States when those states engage in actions that deprive their own citizens of the right to participate in democratic elections and voting. And again, this law was written at a time when it was supposed to, in essence, punish southern states who were depriving Black Americans of the right to vote at that time. And so this amendment said, well, if you don't let Black people vote, then your representation will be diminished in the House of Representatives. You won't have those congressional seats any longer. And then by extension, you will be removed. I'm talking about you, the states. You will lose electoral college votes as well, because the electoral college vote count for your state is made up of the sum of the number of seats in the House of Representatives as well as the U.S. Senate. So if you deprive anyone, and in the amendment it actually says any male over the age of 21, that's what's written into the amendment itself. If you deprive these voters over the age of 21 the right to participate in their voting, then you will lose House seats. Well, who is depriving people of the right to participate in democracy today? It is, once again, liberal states. It's California, which is protecting big tech and the tech platforms that are now selectively censoring voices of conservatives and Republicans and Trump supporters, pro-America voices. And in doing so, by diminishing the ability of the American people to participate in the public square of public discourse, open debate, freedom of speech, First Amendment rights, and so on. But by doing so selectively, targeting conservatives for censorship, while amplifying left-wing voices, amplifying pro-Joe Biden voices, amplifying anti-America voices, amplifying voices of rebellion and insurrection, the tech giants are themselves engaged in acts of treason and insurrection against this country. But on top of that, states like California and Washington, which tend to hold a lot of tech companies, are in fact aiding and abetting those efforts. They are in many cases granting a tax nullification for these tech companies where they don't have to pay property taxes for many years when they set up offices in their state. The states are granting legal protection against these companies by not allowing lawsuits to proceed locally and rigging courts and juries and trials in their local jurisdictions in order to protect these very powerful tech giants that are systematically censoring conservative voices as a way of rigging the election and removing from the public square any person who is a pro-America conservative. So the states are actively involved in aiding and abetting and granting comfort, which is a phrase that's used in the 14th Amendment, to these powerful corporations that are systematically censoring conservative voices. And this means that the states are, in fact, violating the 14th Amendment once again, and that President Trump, by simply invoking the Insurrection Act or declaring an open rebellion against the United States, he then has the power under the 14th Amendment to strip away congressional seats from these states that are engaged in aiding and abetting these open rebellions against the United States government. And in addition to stripping away these representative seats in the House of Representatives, the Electoral College votes would be diminished by the same proportion, under apportionment to the Electoral College. And so, in essence, these left-wing states that are engaged in rebellion and insurrection against the United States of America today, and that are aiding and abetting powerful corporations that are overtly interfering with democracy and rigging elections. Google, for example, tells Democrats to get out and vote, but suppresses such messages to conservatives by using a psychoanalysis preferential messaging to rig elections. By doing this, the states are themselves guilty of violations under the 14th Amendment. And Trump can invoke the 14th Amendment, and he can remove members of the House of Representatives from states like California. And by the way, remember that California in 2018 was able to rig its congressional elections through illegal ballot harvesting operations that are nothing more than election fraud. This was aided and abetted by Google through a mechanism that I just described. Also Facebook and YouTube, selective censorship, and Twitter as well. So there is active collusion, criminal collusion between the tech giants and the state of California to rig elections and to support open rebellions and insurrections against the United States of America. These are criminal offenses in addition to the fact that they are violations of the 14th Amendment. In essence, Trump can now remove the Electoral College votes from the Electoral College of the state of California, at least to the proportion of the state that is engaged in rebellion against the United States. And Trump can thereby lower the threshold of the number of electoral college votes that are needed to win the election. And if Trump declares an insurrection before Election Day, then President Trump can even retroactively challenge the outcome of the election. If he doesn't necessarily win the electoral college vote, he can challenge that and correctly argue that states that have been in violation of the 14th Amendment must have their electoral college numbers reduced according to the proportion of their state that is engaged in open rebellion against the United States. And this is all detailed in the 14th Amendment. That's why this is a secret weapon. President Trump can use this to nullify the members of Congress and nullify the electoral college votes of states that are engaged in rebellion against the United States of America. And that is what he must do, actually. The 14th Amendment, in essence, compels him to do this. He has no choice. He must do this in order to remain congruent with the Constitution of the United States, or at least its amendments, which are part of the Constitution now. So this must happen in order for Trump to defend the office of the presidency and defend the integrity of the United States for all future presidents. In Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, it mentions that when states are engaged in acts of rebellion against the United States, and when those states incur costs associated with that rebellion, that those costs shall not be reimbursed by the federal government. And what this means is that President Trump has no obligation to compensate bankrupt states like California, Oregon, Washington, New York, Illinois, and so on, when they are engaged in insurrection against the United States of America, which they are. Now, notably, all of these states are going broke. California is facing, it looks like, about a projected $100 billion budget shortfall in this year, in 2020. New York, as a state, is bankrupt almost, and New York City is on the verge of having to lay off 22,000 city workers at this point because, of course, these cities and Democrat states are losing their sources of revenue because of the punitive coronavirus lockdowns that they tried to weaponize against the president to try to destroy America's economy in order to get Trump removed from office come November 3rd. But what actually happened was these cities and states destroyed their own revenue sources. Their incomes were based on property taxes, sales taxes, and income taxes, all of which have imploded under these lockdowns, with productive citizens now fleeing these states in order to escape the draconian lockdown rules that have been put in place as political weapons of war against the citizens by Democrat governors for the most part, but also mayors in some cases. So the economic devastation that is being rolled out by these Democrat mayors and governors, this is, according to the 14th Amendment, this is something that the federal government must not compensate them for. They brought it on themselves. They are incurring costs that are part of a rebellion or acts of insurrection against the United States of America. And those acts, that's their own cost. They shall not be reimbursed for that. And it only makes sense. Why should American taxpayers pay back insane left-wing cities and states when they are destroying their own local economies in some weird, twisted effort to try to hurt the president of the United States? Why should a taxpayer in, Indiana or Utah pay for Governor Newsom's evil schemes to punish his own people and destroy his own local economies just to try to hurt Trump? It doesn't make any sense. So Trump will continue to adhere to the 14th Amendment, I believe, and he will deny reimbursement funding or bailout money for these states that are engaged in rebellion. In fact, Trump has already taken certain steps that really lean in that direction. He has said that there will be no federal funding for cities that refuse to abide by the rule of law and refuse to essentially, even though he didn't use this phrase, essentially invoke the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause for their own citizens. And in this language that Trump is saying, and this is fairly recent, and he has said it publicly, I believe that Trump is actually invoking Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. he is saying that there will be no federal funds for you if you refuse to enforce equal protection locally with your own citizens by taking down the insurrectionists and the rioters and the violence and so on. So that is, in my opinion, that is Trump invoking the 14th Amendment already. And it's a strong indication that he's going to then invoke Section 3 and Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, which we've already talked about here. Again, that would mean that Trump would arrest and remove from office every mayor, governor, every judge, every official, civilian or military, who is engaged in open rebellion or aiding or granting aid or comfort to anyone engaged in a rebellion against the United States. And understand that also under this 14th Amendment, Trump could eliminate any domestic enemies, let's say, inside the Pentagon. So if there are any generals or high-level military officials who were put in place by Barack Hussein Obama, who continued to act against this nation as treasonous agents, complicit in this effort to tear down this nation, Trump can remove them. In fact, he's compelled to remove them from power under the 14th Amendment. And if he fails to do so, then he himself is not abiding by the Constitution. Now, I believe that Democrats across America are well aware of what I've just told you. I think that the analysis of the 14th Amendment has probably already gone out in certain circles throughout, the powerful Democrat leaders. And this is why they are now resorting to sheer desperation. They're probably going to launch false flag attacks on America. They'll probably shoot and kill their own people during this 50-day White House siege so they can try to blame it on President Trump, for example. Who knows? They may have a dirty bomb somewhere that they set off. There's nothing they won't try because they're desperate. They know that after the election, if not before, Trump is very likely going to be compelled to follow the 14th Amendment and remove from power all of these insurrectionists across government and military. Again, the Constitution demands that Trump take these actions. This is not something that he can just sit back and ignore. He must remove from power all of these governors and mayors and so on. They must be arrested and stripped of power. The Democrats are aware of this. So this is why they're going to try everything possible to try to steal this election. They're going to, no doubt, try to assassinate the president. They're going to try to sow mass confusion. They're going to engage in ballot harvesting and ballot counterfeiting after the fact. They've already basically admitted this, saying that they may not win on election night, but over the subsequent weeks, they will find the ballots they need to win. Yeah, because they're going to print them. They're going to create the ballots after the fact in the districts that they need, in the counties that they need in order to try to get a win. But that's, of course, blatant fraud. It's criminal fraud. It's election fraud against America. Well, Trump has the ability to arrest and prosecute the individuals involved in that election fraud. And since we already know largely who they are, I mean, they are the Joe Bidens of the world, Kamala Harris, Podesta, the Clintons, and so on. We know who these people are, even locally across Chicago and New York City. It's run by criminal gangs, and we know about the criminality of the Pelosi and Feinstein and Newsom in California and Kate Brown of Oregon and so on. We know who these people are, and the Constitution demands they be arrested. So I wouldn't be surprised if Trump has them all arrested the day after the election in order to halt their election rigging, which will begin the day after the election. In fact, if I were to advise the president on this, I would advise him to officially declare an insurrection no later than the day before the election, because it's very important that the election take place under this declaration of an insurrection so that Trump may legitimately and constitutionally challenge the Electoral College votes of states that are engaged in this open rebellion against the United States. And he may remove from office immediately, or he might wait a couple of days, members of the House of Representatives who come from states that are engaged in open rebellion. And in this way, the House of Representatives could be relatively easily flipped to Republicans. Even if that majority is not achieved based on the current arrangement of House seats, once you eliminate a lot of House seats from California, which is an insurrectionist state, then the majority would probably go to Republicans. Now, importantly, that would remove Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House. And the reason this is critical to understand is because Nancy Pelosi, the scheme of the Democrats is to cause voter confusion, electoral college confusion, ballot confusion, to delay the outcome of the election all the way through January 20th, at which time the current term of President Trump expires under the Constitution. And if there is no president that is recognized for a second term, then the media will argue and Democrats will argue that Nancy Pelosi is next in line and that she becomes president on that day. And she would be in charge. And then Nancy Pelosi would, of course, invoke the 14th Amendment and claim that all conservatives are engaged in acts of insurrection against her government. And then she would strip all of those seats out of Congress and then have a permanent Democrat majority. And she would also use the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, to have Trump and all members of the GOP would be arrested and many would be executed. And the reason we know this is true is because Nancy Pelosi has already publicly declared the president and all members of the GOP to be, quote, enemies of the state. She's already publicly declared that in an interview. And so that is her plan. We know that's her plan, is to arrest and execute all of these GOP members. So if Trump knows this, and he does, you can trust me on that point. If Trump knows this, he knows that defending America against this insurrection, against this attempted authoritarian, communist-leaning takeover of lawless criminal leftists who routinely engage in massive fraud and money laundering like Joe Biden and his son and Ukraine and China and all these things, not even to mention the Clintons. And, treasonous Barack Obama, a sleeper cell president who tried to destroy America. The only way to protect America from these treasonous actors is to invoke the Insurrection Act, declare that a rebellion is taking place, which it is, and then use the 14th Amendment to remove from power all those oath-taking officials in both civilian office and military office who are granting aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States of America, which is exactly what is stated in the 14th Amendment. This is what must happen. This is how Trump can defend America, and importantly, Trump has the power to do so. He alone has this power, it turns out. Now, Congress can override Trump with a 2/3 majority vote in both houses. But is it likely that the Senate would override Trump having the enemies of America arrested? I don't think so. I think there are enough members in the Senate who are tired of the attacks against America. There are enough GOP members who would take a stand and say, this is the time that we must root out the cancer that is ravaging this society. This is the time to stop the terrorism. Rand Paul, Senator Paul, he would obviously argue the same thing that I'm arguing here, as he was viciously attacked and nearly killed by a lunatic left-wing mob as he left the Republican convention speech at the White House. He was nearly killed. And that's the second time Senator Paul has been viciously attacked and harmed by radical left-wing lunatics who hate this country. So the GOP, I do not think, would override this. And this would mean that we could finally drain the swamp all at once, that we could finally clean house. We could finally take down the enemies of America who hate this country. And they hate what it's founded on. They hate the principles of America. They hate fair and free elections, which is why they always try to rig them so they can cheat. And with this, we would be able to take down big tech, because Trump would obviously at some point have to declare that Facebook and Google and YouTube and Twitter and so on are themselves engaged in acts of treason against the United States of America. And we would have to arrest and remove the criminal CEOs of those organizations that have conspired to undermine this country and to destroy democracy through their politically targeted censorship. So this is the upshot of this. Trump has the power. He has the power to do this. There is nothing stopping Trump from doing this. The only thing that can override him is a 2/3 majority vote against him in both the House and the Senate. And that seems very unlikely given how insane this uprising has become and how the GOP, as dumb as they are, they must realize that if they lose, they're all going to be arrested and executed by President Pelosi. So I wonder if the GOP senators are so stupid that they don't even want to live, because they're willing to bow down to the Democrats on everything so far. But what about if you're going to be arrested and murdered by President Pelosi? Will you stand for America then when your own life is at stake? That's the only real question here. And so what you can do to help Trump in this effort, number one is when it comes election day, vote for Trump. Because the more honest votes that Trump gets, the harder it will be for Democrats to cheat and rig the election against him. Secondly, support this idea of the 14th Amendment being invoked by President Trump to remove from power all treasonous enemies of America who are engaged in acts of rebellion or insurrection against the United States. And note that to remove those people, they only have to be engaged in aiding and granting comfort to those who are insurrectionists, who are trying to destroy America. So yes, the mayors of Portland and Seattle and Los Angeles should all be removed from power, and many other cities as well. Yes, the governors of these Democrat states should all be removed from power. And yes, we have to clean house in the Pentagon and remove the stay-behind networks across the deep state, across the military, even in the intelligence communities as well. These powers are in the hands of President Trump right now. It is irrefutable. And in fact, he stays in power all the way through January 20th, even if he, quote, loses this election. Well, what if he used this power to take down the deep state swamp right after the election, which is what must happen under the 14th Amendment? The third thing that you can do is, as you are a patriot, please follow Trump's instructions at the moment where he says do not engage with Antifa terrorists on the streets. Do not go out and try to shoot traitors. Let law enforcement deal with those people. Law enforcement is getting more and more aggressive. They're doing a better job because they're allowed to do more of their jobs now. For example, I think state troopers in Oregon have been federally deputized by federal law enforcement there, which allows the rioters to be charged with federal crimes so they can't be simply let go without bail by local district attorneys who are all George Soros-funded treasonous traitors. So the federal government is getting more aggressive. Let them do their job. Don't go out on the streets. I mean, Kyle Rittenhouse is an American hero, but we would prefer that people do not engage with the rioters and the terrorists right now, at least until the election. Let federal law enforcement do that job and support their efforts to do so. Now, after the election, it seems likely that the radical left is going to attempt an explosive, kinetic takeover or takedown of the entire country. At that point, we may need every patriot that we can find all across America to defend this nation. At that point, who knows what's going to happen? At that point, Trump might ask for your help. At that point, Trump might deputize every concealed carry holder in the country to defend this nation against those who are trying to destroy it. Who knows? But let's watch and see what happens. In the meantime, if leftists are wanting to burn down their own left-wing cities, then we should really stay more hands-off and allow them to commit their own economic suicide, because that's the city that they're going to have to live with. They're going to turn their cities and states into third world nations, essentially, third world areas of the country. And they're going to have to live in that. We don't bail them out. We make them live with the decisions they made. and with the votes that they cast to elect lunatic traitors like Ted Wheeler or Governor Inslee or Governor Kate Brown, let them live with those decisions. And those Democrat-controlled areas will temporarily collapse, but Trump will have their leaders arrested shortly after the election. And then we will be able to help restore those areas and rebuild those areas based on principles of real equal justice under the law, due process, civility, rationality, the rule of law, all of that. But we have to get rid of these radical left-wing treasonous governors and mayors, police chiefs, city council members, and even state legislators, by the way, can be removed by President Trump. So Trump, under the 14th Amendment, I forgot to mention this earlier, he could go in and remove the entire California state legislature from power if those individuals have aided and abetted rebellion against the United States. He can remove them all from power. I mean, you talk about eliminating traitors of America, this can happen. And it even makes me wonder, you've heard rumors all this time of, tens of thousands of indictments and secret sealed indictments against treasonous actors. And you've heard these kinds of rumors from, for example, QAnon circles and maybe some patriot circles and so on. And for a long time, I've wondered whether any of that was true because it really sounded exaggerated to me, almost like a false hope type of thing. But now in the context of the 14th Amendment, it makes sense that there is a list that has been created, a list of targets for federal arrests and under the 14th Amendment, and that all it's going to take is the president invoking this Insurrection Act, invoking the 14th Amendment, and then handing out that list to federal law enforcement agents and also to members of the U.S. military, specifically the military police, to go out and make these thousands of arrests and indict thousands of people, remove them from power. You don't even have to criminally convict them to remove them from power. You remove them from power by military force at first because the 14th Amendment demands it. And at that point, then they may be subjected to a military tribunal. But that's the process by which this would function. So now it makes sense to me that there probably are such lists in existence of thousands of treasonous actors and traitors and mayors and everybody else we've talked about all across America who are going to be removed from power. And that would make Trump by far the greatest president in the history of our country. Other than George Washington. I think that would put Trump above Abraham Lincoln, but just under George Washington, because you can't beat Washington. He founded the whole thing and was, an incredible, inspirational, divine leader that helped give rise to the birth of our nation. Trump would be the leader that saves our nation from the destruction that has been planned by radical left-wing Democrats. And by the way, on a divine level, if Trump were to then appoint enough Supreme Court justices to overturn Roe versus Wade and finally eliminate the mass abortion murder that's taking place across this country, and perhaps pass laws that outlaw the transgender mutilation of children, the chemical castrations, the genitalia mutilation that's taking place by the LGBT community in places like California. If he were to do those two things, then at that point, God might actually have mercy on us. So instead of unleashing God's wrath against America, the judgment of America for its sins, God might, his opinion of America might turn around and we might be saved from the fate that we are currently, on a trajectory towards, which is a fate of destruction and collapse, which is why, frankly, this is why leftists are putting us on that path, because they're anti-God. They hate God, they're atheists, many of them are Satanists and so on, and they want to cause pain and suffering and chaos and destruction because these are things that are that resonate with hell and Satanism. And I'm not going to go into all those details right here in this particular video, but that is an element that's at work here. So there is a path, importantly, there is a path through which President Trump can save America, and he can save America not only from the Democrats, but save America in the eyes of God. And that would be, a cosmic victory that it just dwarfs everything else. It would be a bigger thing than defeating Hitler in World War II. To defeat the Democrats today and defeat their demonism and defeat their pure evil, defeat their hatred toward America, would be the greatest act of love and liberty for all citizens of America. It would be a greater act than freeing the slaves after the Civil War. That's why this would put Trump above Abraham Lincoln, in my opinion. So let's see what happens. In the meantime, do your best to continue supporting President Trump. I know he's not perfect in every way. No person is. I've got a couple of concerns about his fast-track vaccines and so on. But in the big picture, if we are to survive as a nation, we must give Trump a second term so that he can invoke the 14th Amendment and drain the entire swamp. Thousands of people could be removed from power all across the country, including corrupt judges, including even corrupt Supreme Court justices, such as Sotomayor, and Ginsburg's she's probably on her death's bed anyway. She's probably gone anyway. But others who are enemies of America and who take an oath of office, but then they violate that oath. So think about it. Every lawmaker, every public official who has taken an oath of office, but then has violated the Second Amendment, or has violated the First Amendment, or has violated the Fourth Amendment in spying on citizens and so on, all of those people could be removed from power in one day. And that would put America on a whole new trajectory toward liberty, freedom, civility, peace, abundance. So we've got to get through these next couple of months. We've got to give Trump a second term, and then we, the people, are probably going to have to help defend Trump against these lunatic, left-wing, violent demons who are probably going to take to the streets and just try to burn the whole country down, because if they can't run it, they want to destroy it. That's who they are. So thank you for watching. I appreciate your interest in this analysis. I have a lot more videos for you at Brighteon.com. My channel there is called HR Report. You can see all the new videos each day at naturalnews.com. Look for them on the right side, the right column of Natural News, the website. At the same time, by the way, I have a free 9-hour audiobook that you can download right now. It's called the Global Reset Survival Guide. It teaches you how to survive the economic reset, the depopulation agenda, the geopolitical reset, the food supply disruptions, starvation, the vaccine holocaust, everything that's coming. I teach you how to survive it. It's a free book. Download it now at globalreset.news. There's even a downloadable printable PDF, so you can print out the entire transcript of the book. And I also wanted to make that available for the hearing impaired, who are also patriots, So thank you for watching and sharing. Again, my name's Mike Adams, and you can read my work each day at naturalnews.com. God bless America. I love this country. I'm willing to fight to defend it. And I hope you are too. Thank you for watching. A global reset is coming. And that's why I've recorded a new 9-hour audiobook. It's called the Global Reset Survival Guide. You can download it for free by subscribing to the naturalnews.com email newsletter, which is also free. I'll describe how the monetary system fails. I also cover emergency medicine and first aid and what to buy to help you avoid infections. So download this guide. It's free. It's my gift to you simply because I want like-minded people to survive.